Hello everyone, this is Tina Tinde. I'm speaking to you from Geneva. I'm a diversity and gender coordinator at the IFRC. I started in October 2016 and I'm very, very happy to have joined the Red Cross Red Crescent movement. And thank you to everyone who is joining this webinar. We are also recording it, so that we can share it with colleagues who are not able to make it right now. I know it's a public holiday in a couple of Asian countries. We have over 30 people who signed up. I'm not sure how many have been able to join us now. So as you see from the first slide, can everybody see the slide? Just let me know if you have any problems seeing the slide or hearing me. You can just do a chat message. So, yes, wonderful. So you can see that this webinar, it's about developing and implementing a policy to protect against sexual exploitation and abuse. And if the participants could please mute, if you can mute your microphones, it would be great, because I can hear a little bit of noise. So, you know, in 2015 there was a resolution adopted by the International Conference on sexual and gender-based violence. And one of the items, one of the calls in that resolution was for all members of the movement to develop their own policies on protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. And we have to make it very clear that this is a specific subcategory of sexual and gender-based violence. Sexual exploitation and abuse is about when staff or volunteers abuse the people that they are there to protect. So this webinar and this policy development, it's not about sexual harassment policy, it's not about intimate partner violence, it's not about sexual assault after a disaster or conflict. It's about the very unfortunate and criminal activities that are related to staff or volunteers violating the code of conduct and abusing the people affected populations. So just so we have that clear, this is an extremely difficult area. I will go to one slide that will illustrate that. Here we have two scenarios which are based on reality. It's, for instance, if a staff member asks you to help him because he has received death threats after investigating sexual exploitation of a child by a Red Cross volunteer. Or another scenario could be that a young woman brings a baby to your national society and she says the father was wearing a Red Cross vest when he raped her. So what do you do? And in these cases, there could be, one could already do much to help and to investigate and to resolve the issue by using existing policies such as the Code of Conduct. But it is really necessary for all of our organizations to adopt PSEA, protection again from sexual exploitation and abuse policies, to make sure that we have the right, that we make the right steps in addressing such horrific acts. So this is what we need to discuss here. And you see here in the photo, it's Elias, who is from the Men Engage Kenya. I took the photo when we were at an SGBV conference in Nairobi last October. And here in our next slide, we have definitions of sexual exploitation and abuse. And this is taken directly from the United Nations Secretary General's Bulletin in 2003. This bulletin came after popular demand, following some revelations in around 2002, where 40 NGOs and international organizations were involved in abuse of women and children in West Africa. So then the international community wanted to take action and take a strong stand against this type of abuse. So the UN Secretary General's Bulletin obviously applies only to UN agencies, but it is also a very good guide for the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement. You see that it relates to any attempted or actual abuse of a position of vulnerability, differential power, or trust for sexual purposes. That is sexual exploitation, and sexual abuse is the actual or threatened physical intrusion of a sexual nature, whether by force or under unequal or coercive conditions. These lines are also included in the IFRC Code of Conduct that came in 2007, and it also includes more points from the UN Secretary General's Bulletin, such as any exchange of money for sexual purposes is illegal, and not knowing the age of the person that one is abusing is no excuse. If they say that, oh, I thought that she or he was over 18, that is no excuse. So it has more details than that in the Code of Conduct. And of course, this is about accountability to affected people. It really relates, as I mentioned, as the Secretary General's Bulletin mentioned, it really relates to power inequalities. People who are committing these kinds of crimes, they have been doing it because they can. They have been in a position of more power than the person that they have abused, and these situations also stem from very unequal gender relations. Most of the victims are women and children, and most of the perpetrators are men. And we are all working in organizations that have been traditionally led by men. And this leads me to the recommendation that if there is a better gender balance in the leading roles and leadership of our organizations, this would have a positive impact on how these issues are dealt with. Myself, I came into this, became acutely aware of this problem when I was an electoral worker in Cambodia in 1992-93. I worked for the UN, excuse me, and I was following my colleagues who drove white UN cars into the red light districts of Phnom Penh. I was also friends with doctors who were treating children who had been raped by UN peacekeepers, and I also learned about staff from international organizations, civilians who had been abusing Cambodian women and children. So this is 92-93, it's 25 years ago. So I've been trying to monitor the international developments in this area, and much work is going on. I will come to that later on the different slides. But what is often found to be the problem is the support from leadership in moving these accountability issues forward, and also in assigning enough resources and staff to this. The recurring recommendation from all the reviews that have been done, for instance, in IFRC's work on this, is what is missing is a complaints and investigation mechanism. When you as a national society now start to look at this topic, those of you who have not done so already, you will see that traditionally it has been quite common to look at the disciplinary measures, the prevention, and the, let's say, internal matters related to protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. So you could call it more the prevention, actually. But the trend is now for a large push towards more respect for the people that we are there to serve, and to engage them closer in all our work. This is nothing new, but it is absolutely stunning how difficult it is for many organizations to involve local people in their policy making, and to involve them in setting up local feedback and complaints mechanisms. So this is the recurring recommendation. It's to work closer with the local population and to make sure that there are safe and confidential complaints and investigation mechanisms. And here is, this slide has a screenshot of a part of the Code of Conduct of IFRC from 2007, which says that staff have a duty to inform beneficiaries of the contents of the Code of Conduct, and also to provide information on how and to whom to report any misconduct or failure. So obviously this Code of Conduct and all the Code of Conducts that I have read, they are very good in stating the issues. However, the problem is often in the actual implementation. As you see in the second paragraph here, it says that staff have a duty to report any breach of this code to the appropriate person. And this brings us to the mandatory reporting, which is also very complex. There is a study going on in ICRC now on the mandatory reporting and the risks and the opportunities. And also, I advise you to look at this also, what it could mean to actually have mandatory reporting. There are, I know people who have taken this very seriously and who have dutifully reported sexual exploitation and abuse, and this has not always led to a good solution of the issue. It has sometimes led to vilification or even threats against the person who reported, let's say, on another colleague who committed it. So until an organization shows that it deeply cares about this issue and that it has safe and confidential reporting mechanisms and a trustworthy anti-retaliation policy and a whistleblower policy, it is going to be very difficult to have well-functioning policies on protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. As I mentioned, the community engagement is extremely important. And in February this year, the ICRC and IFRC launched a very useful guide on how to engage with local communities. This work is extremely closely linked to protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. It has to do with taking seriously the people that we work with, the people in the country and the local area where we are. And of course, as national societies, you are already there. You are already among the local population, and you are part of them. Your volunteers come from there, and your staff comes from there. So the movement is extremely well placed to take up the battle now against sexual exploitation and abuse, because not only do you represent the movement, but you also represent the local people. So this is why it is extremely important for all the national societies to adopt their own policies with all these practical points that we are going through in this presentation. I like this list of recommendations by Norla. It's an NGO that works in Nepal. I tweeted them several times about this and praised them, because the list here really, it gives you the points on how to set up gender balanced assessment teams and join gender support networks, and to identify and cooperate with women grassroots organizations, etc. It's a very good list that I recommend you to look at and implement as much as you can. I'm sure many of you are already doing this, but it's good to have a checklist like this. And here I put in the decision so that you have the actual wording. So this international conference resolution, it applies to every member of the movement. So when you draft and work on your policies, it's very good, if you like. You could use the paragraph number 2, which calls upon all components of the movement to adopt and enforce zero-tolerance policies on sexual exploitation and abuse of beneficiaries by their staff and volunteers, and subject these individuals to sanctions for their actions. So this is extremely important, and but we have to be very realistic when we work on this. I remember in 2008, Prince Zayed of Jordan, he was then the Jordan's UN ambassador. he wrote a confidential UN report called Zero Compliance with Zero Tolerance. So using the term zero tolerance, it's very good because that's what we would like to have. But his report showed that there had been several hundred cases of abuse of children and women in Congo in 2007, 2008, and then he issued this report, which was very shocking. But it still did not really cause immediate compliance, which are due to the issues that I already mentioned. It's power inequalities, it's gender issues, it's lack of support from leadership, it's lack of support from partners, and which then again brings around the lack of support for, let's say, training, for instance. So IFRC, together with national societies, has tried to address this topic since 2005. There have been numerous working groups, reports, and reviews, and all of this mainly followed the huge sex abuse scandal that happened in West Africa in 2002. So about a year and a half ago, there was a working group on gender and diversity issues, also SGBV, that was set up under the governing board, and they have called for mapping of what the national societies have done so far on to address sexual exploitation and abuse. So there was a scoping study done last year, which found that about 50 national societies have addressed this topic in either in their codes of conduct or other policies that are relevant to protection from sexual exploitation and abuse, for instance, child protection policy. We also received a very good two-pager from the Turkish Red Crescent, which explained how they relate this PSEA work to sexual and gender-based violence prevention and response, and how they relate it to community projects. They also have included complaints mechanism, which is to put out a mailbox in their project locations where people can anonymously give feedback or send a complaint regarding this topic or any other code of conduct violation. So the Turkish example is a very good one. I got the permission from Turkish Red Crescent to mention and use their example. So if anybody is interested in seeing this, I'll be happy to send it to you. We did not get as many responses to the mapping and scoping study as we had wanted. So we need to continue working with you to learn who of you would have good examples, good policies that we could perhaps share with others, and what kind of support would you need other than this little webinar. I'm happy to do many more webinars if you find it worthwhile for other colleagues. But we would really like to work closely with you because this work is now a priority by the General Assembly, International Conference, and Council of Delegates. This slide shows a screenshot of the front page of the draft policy that was made in 2010 by IFRC. We, just like you, national societies, we have also been called on and have committed ourselves to update this policy. It was actually never adopted, but it was drafted, and I have the text. It's very good. However, it is lacking the issues that I mentioned on a systematic description of reporting systems and of investigation, who is responsible for the investigation, and it also needs more work on the training and outreach and communication with affected populations, and very importantly, it also needs a budget. So this work that we are now engaging in, it does not happen automatically. It does need to be financed. So I will do my best to try to have all these concerns put into our policy, which is being updated this year. And then let's put our heads together and strategize on how we can find resources for this and how we can get the support from the top in our organizations so that finances are actually coming forth for training and to set up these mechanisms. We will really be stronger together as we do this. I'm putting in some references to some very good sources for you. It's the minimum standard commitments. This has a section on sexual exploitation and abuse. And as you know, the 7 Moves trainings, I'm sure those of you who listen here, you've probably taken the training, and you probably even held the training in your national societies. And then this is a very important contribution to the work. And then I also put in the unseen, unheard, the research on gender-based violence in disasters, and the 3 case studies that were done in Asia Pacific. So congratulations to everyone who was involved in these. These are extremely important resources to understand the issues and as basis for any contact that you have with your leadership, volunteers, and local population about this. And in order to support national societies, we have been thinking that maybe it's a good idea with a preliminary list, a set of questions that could help you. And of course, this is only tentative. It does not mean that it's exactly what you would need, but it is based on the Interagency Standing Committee minimum operating standards, which has provided very, very good guidance in this area. So, for instance, it's important to see if you would like to define sexual exploitation and abuse in the same way as the UN, or if you would like to have a more culturally or nationally appropriate definition. And which of your already existing rules should you use when you develop this policy? It's important to link this policy to existing policies, and or also to use it to promote a policy on whistleblowing, anti-retaliation, harassment, respectful workplace, child protection, and also to link it to the background check of candidates and staff. So, as you perhaps know, what would be an early warning of sexual exploitation and abuse? One early warning is sexual harassment of female staff. So if there is an unfriendly, if there's an aggressive and disrespectful office situation, it could also indicate that sexual exploitation and abuse of affected people is going on. So these things are very important to be aware of. It's also important to have focal points in every office, in every chapter, in every emergency deployment. It's important to have focal points for protection from sexual exploitation and abuse. And here we see a photo I took of Chrissy when we were in Beirut. Also, the list here shows a number of things that could perhaps guide your policy. Are there community-based complaints and feedback mechanisms already? What are the reporting responsibilities that I mentioned? Is it mandatory or not? And what are the implications? And who would be receiving complaints? And how would that how to make the complainants feel safe? And that goes for both the people who are complaining about being abused, and also staff and colleagues and friends and family who are supporting them or also reporting. And as you are perhaps aware, IFRC set up a hotline. It's called Safe Call. It was set up some years ago, and it is supposed to receive reports, calls, or emails, but mostly they receive calls from people who have experienced that IFRC staff have violated the code of conduct. They have not received many sexual exploitation and abuse reports. I think there are many reasons for that. it's very difficult for, let's say, a victim of sexual exploitation and abuse to even know that there is a safe call option, and that person may not be speaking the language. They only speak English. This is a group of retired British police officers who are receiving the calls. I called them to ask about their background, and I was told that there is one woman there who has been working on sexual and gender-based violence cases in the police earlier. However, if the victim or survivor is not English speaking, it would be impossible for that person to, or not impossible, but very difficult. The person would need an interpreter in order to be able to report. So now there is a review of that safe call. It's the audit unit in IFRC that is handling it. So it will definitely be part of our considerations when we make our policy on how to ensure that there is actually a possibility to report. So a hotline is very important, but it needs to be backed up by a number of other mechanisms so that local people can actually file complaints. So, and then it's important to work closely with the legal team in your office on how investigation process will happen and who will be in the investigative teams. For instance, when there are children and youth who are being abused, there are guidelines on how to respectfully interview them. These guidelines, I know that they exist on the website, on UNICEF's website, and perhaps some of your national societies also have guidelines on this. We should also remember the Psychosocial Center in Copenhagen under the Danish Red Cross, the IFRC Psychosocial Center, which has much expertise on receiving complaints and responding to sexual and gender-based violence. So keep that in mind if you have questions regarding the response and how to carefully receive complaints from anybody who has been subjected to sexual exploitation and abuse, and how to ensure confidentiality, data protection, and protection against retaliation. As I have mentioned, these are really, really difficult issues, but it can be done, and safe and confidential systems have to be set up. Also, how do you ensure that the relevant cases are reported to the police? We know that in many countries, including my own, Norway, survivors of sexual assault and abuse are not necessarily well treated by the police. I saw that in 2016, Amnesty International reported on how rape victims in Norway evaluated the reception they found at the police when they reported the crime. And 40% of the survivors reported that they were not received in a satisfying way. So this is Norway. In my country also, only 10% of reported rapes end up in conviction. So this is another complaint, an alert by Amnesty International, that the conviction rate is very low. And I mention Norway because it is often seen as bastion of gender equality, that women's rights have come very far. Obviously, this is not only about women, but they are in the majority in the number of victims around the world. So I mentioned this. So it is actually it is very good that the movement tries to change behaviors and to ensure justice. But we cannot expect to be able to change these ingrained patriarchal cultures that are influencing our police system, judiciary, politics, financial distribution to authorities in our countries. But we have enough knowledge in the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement to really make an effort and to make sure that the best practices that exist are applied in our organizations. I would say that a person who is so unfortunate to be abused by one of our colleagues or volunteers should receive the best possible care, as if This had happened very close to a well-equipped sexual assault clinic, which is staffed by nurses and doctors who have training and certificate in taking forensic evidence, and who know exactly which path to take to engage legal counsel for the person, and how to bring this to the police, and how also and then the National Society and IFRC should also know how to deal with compensation and redress for the survivors, and of course disciplinary action internally against the perpetrator. So there is a dual track. It's both an internal disciplinary issue, but it's also, when it has been proven that it has happened, it's also a criminal offense to commit sexual exploitation and abuse. As we know, there will be no case in court without evidence, and this brings me to the particular knowledge and skills that the Red Cross Red Crescent movement has in terms of health. So we have many health experts, we have many volunteers who are doctors and nurses, and I would like to learn from the national societies what are the resources available to support not only our own organizations, but also other organizations, let's say following a disaster or a conflict. What can the Red Cross Red Crescent movement offer in terms of medical staff? I know that WHO, the World Health Organization, is thinking about the same, because I was just in a meeting with the Interagency Standing Committee on this issue, and both WHO and IFRC, we said that we should be able to contribute medical forensic expertise to address these cases. So please keep that in mind. And here we see that we are referring in the policy development, we are referring to the PEP kits, which would prevent HIV transmission after sexual assault. One also needs to provide medical assistance to prevent pregnancy, and this list also has the issue of medical and legal forensic evidence. Also legal representation is important. Psychosocial support is very important, and even support for emergency shelter and food. So as we know, sexual exploitation and abuse, any gender-based violence, it is extremely dangerous, and it really impacts the victim's life across all areas. Economic, it could ruin people for life, actually. So this is why the response and the prevention is also has to be a very broad from our side. There is also, I don't know if you saw on the web and in the news from Haiti, there is a lawyer from Haiti who is representing several women who have filed complaints with him to the UN about being abused by UN peacekeepers in Haiti and having children after these abuses. The lawyer said that he had sent and contacted the UN many times without getting a response. It's important, I think, to be. Somebody has joined and can see what's being shared. Okay, I'm sorry if you can't see. I'll. The PowerPoint that I'm using here has been shared with the participants, so one could look at that afterwards. If it's not showing now, I'm sorry. It's very important to be aware of the international activities that are going on this. So I recommend you also to watch the movie The Whistleblower, which is about private security company joining UN staff in running trafficking rings in Bosnia about 10-15 years ago. So The Whistleblower is a good film based on a true story. So I do recommend that. Also the assistance to children born out of sexual exploitation and abuse is very important. This is really very much about how much our organizations care. And there have been reports of abuses also by our staff and volunteers. And in the cases I have heard about, it has been pushed under the rug and made to disappear. This is not how we should deal with these issues. This brings us to also the issue of training, awareness raising, and partnerships. You are all in your countries. Many of you are in the capitals. You have chapters. And both during peacetime, but also during difficult times of disasters and conflict, the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement is there. And then there are also many UN agencies, probably, and other NGOs and other actors. So it's important to link up with them. The UN Humanitarian Coordinator has responsibility to address sexual exploitation and abuse in his or her work. This work has been going very slowly due to the reasons that I've mentioned. But please link up with these entities and also with the local women's organizations if you have not done that already. And also regarding training, I mentioned the 7 moves training. It's extremely useful. This would be there's a section of 2 or 3 hours, including watching a movie called To Serve with Pride. And then there are some guidelines in the training on interaction, interactive debates on some of the difficult issues regarding sexual exploitation and abuse. Also, the people who have the responsibility for addressing this, it should be reflected in their job description. There should be time set aside, and they should be rated on how they address this topic. And the very, very important matter is, of course, the budget. It does require financing, just like any other activity we do. It needs to be financed. There is a paradox that many of our partners and donors, they are asking us to do more on this topic, yet we have not seen much funding for it. I saw that particularly when I worked on sexual exploitation and abuse when I was in the UN High Commissioner for Refugees in 2004 to 2009. I was working on this topic, and I was chairing an interagency committee working group where IFRC was actually a member. I was chairing that group, but we got no funding. So it was very difficult to even propose anything, which we did, but we did not get funding, even for an awareness raising activity in Bukavu in Congo, I remember. We got absolutely nothing. We asked for $2,000 or $3,000. Nothing from our leadership. So we need to push harder for this. We do need funding for this work and accountability. So now I'm getting closer to the last slides with some questions on how you would like to prepare your policy. Which units would you like to involve? Are there NGOs in your area that you could share best practices with, or that could share with you? And the local women's organizations are very important. We mentioned the Red Cross, Red Crescent expertise on health. And data collection is also very important. I remember in UNHCR there was data collection. Twice a year, the Inspector General, he showed me the statistics on who had been reporting sexual and exploitation and abuse cases. And the majority each time was a cleaning woman who had been forced to provide sexual services to an international male staff member after work hours. So the Inspector General told me that this was the recurring problem, and this clearly illustrates the power inequalities and the gender inequalities that we are facing in some of these settings. So the reporting is very important. So if you are able to, in your own organization, to talk to your human resources and legal team and ask how they report on this, that would be very useful. And if they don't, then that should be part of PSEA policy. and also what are the most typical cases. I mentioned the ones that I heard about in UNHCR 8 to 10 years ago, but it could have changed. Also, it's important to link up with our youth and volunteers to get their input and also to make them aware of these issues. And I know that many of you have undergone the OCAC, the Organizational Capacity Assessment Certification. There is an indicator on violence prevention, and there's one on accountability to affected people. The numbers of these indicators have now changed to 17 and 63. So it's important for you to look at how you fared in this area and see how it can be improved if necessary. I'd also like to know how IFRC can support you in preparing a policy. We have actually, in IFRC, we have committed to one of our major donors. It's the British Development Agency, DFID. They have, we have committed to them to do the IFRC, have it adopted this year, the PSEA policy. And in 2018, 19, and 20, IFRC has committed to supporting 15 national societies per year in developing and adopting your policies. So this is very ambitious. It's actually one of my main priorities is to work on this. So I'm really ready to support. So I would hope that we could make that goal. It would affect the funding that we receive from DFID, and we will put up a huge case internally in IFRC to make sure that a part of that amount would go to this important work. We should have. We should develop specific training on this. 7 moves is very good, but 2 to 3 hours may not be enough. There is an online training being prepared now for launch this July, approximately by UNHCR, UNICEF, UNFPA, and some other organizations. And that's an online training on PSEA. And I would believe that we could probably get access to it. However, there are some differences, especially but maybe only in immunities and privileges by international staff and by your national society staff and volunteers. So we would have to keep that in mind, but it's not that hard. I would like to say, as I close my presentation, I'd like to say that it is not as difficult to write and to have a policy adopted as it is to implement it. Of course, it needs to contain the necessary components. It needs to be supported by senior management, but the challenge is in the implementation and in protecting not only the affected people, but also protecting those who are working on this internally. So it is really not difficult. It's really not easy, but I think if we can develop a culture of trust and on an ambitious agenda on adopting such policies throughout the movement, I think that we're really, really on a good path. So this ends my presentation for now. I'm ready to take any questions. I realize that these are difficult issues. So if you have questions you do not wish to give me now, you could send it by mail or you could call me up anytime to discuss this. But I'm sure maybe there are some comments that I could hear from you now.
Hello, Tina. It's Jennifer Evans, the National League Child Protection Australian Red Cross. My apologies, by the time I figured out how to dial in, I only came in towards the end of the presentation. So I would like to see if I can get a copy of the PowerPoint. So my comment's a little bit out of context, perhaps. I would suggest that Victoria McDonough, our International Child Protection Specialist, who's not able to join us at the moment because she's in Bangladesh, would be useful to have a conversation with in terms of the work that she and others have done around facilitating the child protection policy development in our national societies. There's probably a lot of lessons learned around that, which could be helpful to share as we go forward.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you. I would love to speak to Victoria. Absolutely. Thanks. This is closely connected to child protection, definitely.
Yes, and we are particularly concerned to see how the policies complement and supplement each other, and also not to detract from the work on the child protection policy, which is starting to get considerable traction around the organisation. So the best way we can coordinate them to strengthen both would be welcomed into the discussion and thinking.
Absolutely. Yes, I totally agree. And in the list of in the presentation, there is a list of policies that are very relevant, and of course, child protection policy for national societies and also for IFRC are extremely relevant. So thank you for that point, Jennifer. Any other comments on requests? Feel free to ask or to contact me later.
Hello. I'd like to share something. Rezina Halim from Bangladesh. Yes, Miss Victoria is in Bangladesh now, and she's from 29th April, and she will leave in 11th May. Within this time, yesterday we had our first child protection policy workshop, and tomorrow we'll have a plan of action to implement that policy. And in this policy, we focusing gender-based violence and code of conduct and other things which we did in Tina's presentation. Hopefully, we will able to prepare, and if it's possible for us to implement that plan of action, we may have some good results in Bangladesh. And regarding you are asking whether we are able to prepare a policy or not, if we get support, inshallah, we may try to prepare another policy, GBP policy, within June 2018, hopefully. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rezina. I'm very happy to hear about your workshop and your work on child protection and SGBV. Yeah, I would love to have you as our partner in having adopted PSEA policy in 2018. That would be wonderful, and I'm ready to support you. Any other comments? If not, I think that we'll see this as a bold start of our efforts. And do not hesitate to ask me also to give a webinar, a similar one or a better one, if you wish, to some of your colleagues and those who were not able to join in. This is a work in progress. I also hope to link up directly with several of you. If there are no more comments, I'll wait a few more seconds.
Hello, Tina. This is May Maloney from. Oh, go ahead, Jennifer.
Oh no, May, I was going to say it would be good if we could link up with you, Tina, when Victoria's back in country, and probably including May in that conversation. One little, I suppose, caution's the right word. When I heard about the amount of time you've got and the number of policies looking to develop, reflecting on our journey around the child protection policy, I think it is ambitious, particularly in terms of the education and understanding to get the buy-in to actually generate the policy and have it meaningful within the local national societies. But certainly May and Victoria would be able to give insights around that might be helpful. Thanks, May.
Thanks, Jennifer, and a big thank you to Tina. I think this was a really excellent and really valuable presentation, certainly for us in the Asia Pacific region and the IFRC teams in the Asia Pacific, but also I know for the National Society of Interest. I'm just very keen before we wrap up to hear if there are any comments from people who are working in HR, whether it's federation or national societies. Do you have any ideas or initial thoughts on how we would go about introducing or getting more interest in the idea of a PSEA policy? Would it be national level webinars, or what would be your suggestions on raising awareness about the commitments from the International Conference resolution to develop PSEA policies?
Thank you, May, for kind words, and also to Jennifer. And thank you, May, for raising that question. Yes, exactly what will it take to develop a policy? Obviously, as Jennifer says, it could be a very cumbersome process. And I think it will be challenging in the national societies and also in IFRC. I think we will need time. However, I'm quite optimistic in terms of content because of the Interagency Standing Committee's task force that has been working on this for so many years. And there is a brilliant guideline in the minimum operating standards, which has 27 indicators, and most of those are in the presentation that I just showed you. But this is readily available online. So by using those indicators, we have really covered a lot of issues. And of course, it has to be adapted to the local and national situation, especially regarding complaints mechanisms and investigations. Each nation has its own legal system. However, by taking a very practical approach, by working closely with the local authorities, whether it's a health clinic or a local police station or a local women's organization, I think that we will be able to move forward on this. So I have just called for the first meeting of revived task force on PSEA at IFRC. We don't have a date yet, but I've made some draft terms of reference and a backdrop of what has happened. And in my work on this, I will try to help to work with our colleagues so that we don't get into very, very long discussions, but to have a basic short policy and to make sure that we focus our time, energy, and money on the implementation. That's just my approach to it, because I've seen since 1992-93 how much time has gone into very lengthy and brilliant policies, but most of them have not been properly implemented. So I would say focus on the local outreach, focus on open dialogue. Do not be afraid to speak about these issues. These issues should not be silenced. That's something that perpetrators really enjoy. It's when nobody talks about it and when things take time. So this is just my take on it, but I know that each situation is different. There are bureaucracies in all of our organizations and decision-making procedures. But whatever I can do to help, I'm here. Thanks.
I think the focus on implementation is very helpful and may help expedite the journey if you can see get that support and see how it looks more concretely. Sounds like a really positive strategy.
Yeah, thank you, Jennifer. We would, in a policy, one could refer to all of the decisions and policies that already exist, and they, like one does in a, let's say, in a resolution or in a policy. Yeah, I look very much forward to working with you all on this.
Hi, Tina. Thank you for your presentation. It was really well presented, and I'd really like to have a copy. My name is Saida, and I'm from IFRC Bangladesh office. Just a couple of comments, like when we were talking about the PSEA, and I think awareness raising both among the staff, especially within the IFRC as well as the National Society, is one of the key things when it comes to discussing issues like around PSEA and also child protection. That's one of the experience that we're undergoing at the moment. BDRCS is in process of developing this child protection policy. And there is huge need of awareness raising both the staffs within the National Society as well as the IFRC. We have involved our HR as well into the child protection policy, but we see also a number of other department focal points like the OD department, the DR department, the community engagement focal points. We should also be part of this process. We've also seen, noted from our experience of having complaints response mechanism in our programs, when it comes to sensitive complaining. That is also something that we have been experiencing very recently within our programs to establish, feedback mechanisms for sensitive complaining, having appeal formats and non-sensitive complaining procedures as well. These are some of the initiatives that we've also taken through the BDRC's programming. So there's both that is important. Of course, one is the policy level, but also to implement activities in ways so that the staff can understand that how it adds value and how this can be practiced. The BDRCS also has a good number of MCH centers where there are midwives, and there's mobile health teams that are deployed in almost every emergencies. It would be good to have awareness among them, as well as trainings about how they can address and respond to sexual abuse and respond to the victims who have experienced such cases. And I think I'd like to have a copy of your presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Saida, for highlighting all of these key topics. Look much forward to working with you on this. Thank you.
Hi again, Tina. Basira Amiri from IFRC Afghanistan. I have a comment on the policy development. Thank you so much for the very comprehensive presentation. There was a lot of good information which we have captured. In our context, I would suggest that we would have a special attention on how we can engage people at the local communities, especially in the conflicted zones. Like, we would like to know hear the voices of those who are actually marginalized and who are actually always ignored, and because it's very important that we know the voices from those people and also put them into consideration of how we can reach those people and how we can put their comments and their opinions in our policy. And there should be kind of measurements on how we can reach those people actually. And that's very important from my point of view to be considered in our policy and in our when we are contextualizing the policy for prevention from sexual exploitation and abuse. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Basirama. That's very, very valid points, and it goes straight to the core of who this policy is for. It is to protect people from sexual exploitation and abuse, and speaking to those who you say are marginalized, those are the ones who are most at risk. I would also like to mention people with disabilities who are very much at risk of sexual exploitation and abuse and other gender-based violence. So indeed, look forward to working with you on this. Thank you so much. Any other comments from our colleagues? Thank you very much for your feedback. I know you have busy schedules. We are just starting now. I think that for the development of the IFRC policy, we also really appreciate your input because we are one movement together, and by working together on this topic, we have a better chance of ending this type of abuse.
Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
Yeah, I'm Saudia from ICRC. I'm based in Srinagar in Kashmir in India, and I really feel very happy and very privileged to be a part of this discussion, and it has been awe-inspiring, the kind of commitment that you have and the work that you really have done so far and that you really want to push forward. And it's something that we as humanitarian workers, this is something that is so important and is it has such crucial significance in our everyday activities and our engagement in the field, because we work so much for the protection of the affected people, of the disadvantaged people, who are ordinary people just like us, but because of the crisis they are suffering, and that puts them at a greater disadvantage. And in that vulnerability, in that context of extreme vulnerability, their rights should be protected. And whenever there is power inequality, there is sexual exploitation, sadly. So if it's a humanitarian worker, if it's a member of the security force, from the government, from the militia, anybody who assumes that position of power or privilege over the others becomes a perpetrator. And that's why it's so important for us to be aware of our responsibilities, to be aware of scenarios which can develop, and to be able to respond to them, to be able to report about them, to have that level of maturity in our organizations, in our working environment, that we can talk about such issues openly and face this reality, that this is a reality and people are suffering because of this. And then to have that seriousness in our policy making and to be able to follow it up stringently. So I really I'm very happy that such issues are being discussed and we are all a part of it now. So thank you so much, and I really look forward to meeting you all and to be a part of these discussions, and hopefully something really concrete coming up. I'm sure. So yeah, thank you so much, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Saudia, for participating in this and for your comments. Yes, together we are stronger. ICRC has also been called upon to develop a PSCA policy. And we in Geneva, we are meeting quite regularly with the teams, the gender-related teams in ICRC, and we are discussing also how we can push for this together. So thank you very much for being part of this. Any other comments from anybody? Feel free. If you have any information about your organization's approach to date on PSCA, feel free to send it to me in an email. I'd be really happy, and I will only use it, based on your permission. There has been a call from the Working Group on Gender and Diversity and SGBV under the Governing Board to set up a platform of resources. So we will see if we get resources for that. It's very difficult to get resources for this, but I'm happy to at least provide a hub in my own system for information as we move forward on developing our policies. Thank you very much. And any request I will have for a new webinar, I will comply. This was a true pleasure. Thank you. Shall we end here?
Thank you, Tina.
Yes, thank you very
Goodbye,
much,
everyone.
Tina. Very helpful.
Thank you, Tina. Very helpful. Thank you.
Tina.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.